Previously, I talked about why Taiwan would be completely outmatched in any military confrontation with the Chinese mainland. Even if the United States and all of its allies decide to intervene militarily on Taiwan's behalf, they are likewise going to be outmatched and militarily defeated by the People's Liberation Army. I would again like to emphasize that this is not merely my opinion. This is the conclusion of the United States military. The United States military conducted several very detailed war games, all of which essentially arrived at the same conclusion. The United States cannot match China in any military confrontation that happens within about 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers of the Chinese coast. That is to say that while the United States still has global military dominance, the People's Republic of China has regional military dominance. In this part of the world, the People's Republic of China has total military supremacy. More and more people are slowly beginning to wake up to this fact. And as they are doing so, a very frequently asked question is, when is China going to militarily reclaim Taiwan? I do not believe that China is going to reclaim Taiwan by military force, at least anytime soon, for several reasons. First of all, I would like to talk about why peaceful reunification is infinitely more preferable than reunification by military force for all parties involved. Later on, I am also going to talk about why the PLA has much better military options than a direct reunification by force. The PLA has other things that it can do militarily in order to influence Taiwan. The main reason why I do not believe that there will be a military reunification anytime soon is that China actually has fairly little to gain from a reunification by military force. Now, allow me to explain what I mean by that. War is always a messy affair, even if one side has near total dominance, even if the war is going to be over fairly quickly. That war is still going to have a lot of fallout. It is going to have political fallout, and it is going to have economic fallout. That economic fallout is going to be there because, on the one hand, shipping routes are going to be temporarily disrupted. On the other hand, there is the cost of the war itself, which is never cheap. And while the PRC can absolutely bear the brunt of all of that economic cost, there is also the cost in human lives. And I think that the cost in human lives for Taiwan is the real issue here. If the PLA retakes Taiwan by military force, it is almost certainly going to end in at least a few thousand young Taiwanese soldiers being killed by the PLA, possibly much more than a few thousand. This is going to leave a mark on the local Taiwanese population. Previously, I said that there are pro-PRC sentiments on Taiwan, but those sentiments are going to start disappearing if there is going to be a large war and Taiwan's residents are going to start dying. Taiwanese people are going to remember for many decades how the PLA came to them one day, started bombing them, killed some of their young people and their young relatives, and eventually forced them into the People's Republic of China. Taiwan is going to be an economic black hole because all of that infrastructure is going to need to be repaired. Infrastructure is going to be damaged in a war one way or another. Taiwan is also going to be a very discontent and unstable province within the People's Republic of China. Taiwanese people are going to remember the military assault for many decades. They will be discontent, and Taiwan is therefore going to become an internal problem within China. Right now, Taiwan is a thorn in China's side, but it is an external thorn. An external problem is infinitely better than an internal problem. So that is why I do not believe that China actually has much to gain through reunification by military means. The second reason why mainland China might not want to militarily retake Taiwan, China does not want to re-roll the dice, so to speak. Right now, almost everything geopolitically is working out in mainland China's favor. Mainland China is still rapidly growing as an economy. China's geopolitical weight, its military influence everywhere around the world, and its scientific output are all rapidly expanding. China is happy with the status quo. If China is going to retake Taiwan by military force, that is going to risk changing the global status quo. That is going to be a challenge to the global status quo. Ever since Deng Xiaoping's era, China's geopolitical strategy has been to lay low and to allow itself to grow, to accumulate more power, although this is admittedly becoming harder and harder to do as China is becoming bigger and bigger. The wild card here is the United States. Now, I would like to emphasize that the United States is by no means an ally of Taiwan. The United States does not even recognize Taiwan as a legitimate government. The United States is in the business of selling Taiwan very outdated military equipment at exorbitant prices and refuses to sell more modern military equipment such as F-35s or even advanced military radars to Taiwan because the United States is afraid of the fact that the People's Republic of China might reclaim Taiwan fairly soon. If that happens, all military technology currently on Taiwan is going to be compromised. The PLA is going to take that equipment, they are going to analyze that equipment very thoroughly, they are going to find out the exact technical specifications of all of the hardware that the United States military is using, and that is going to compromise all of that equipment. However, the United States might retaliate against China asymmetrically. A military reunification with Taiwan is going to be a message to the United States that China is ready to challenge the United States militarily on the global arena. The United States is going to try to retaliate asymmetrically, either economically or militarily. Frankly speaking, I do not think that the United States has that many options in retaliating against mainland China. They might try to economically retaliate somehow. However, escalating the existing trade war is going to ensure that the United States is going to suffer economically no less than the People's Republic of China. Alternatively, they might react asymmetrically by military means. A few things that they can do is intercept Chinese shipping, for example, near the Red Sea, near the Suez Canal. Since the United States still has global military dominance, they would be able to set up an effective blockade. However, that is not something I think that they will ever do for several reasons. First of all, because China is a nuclear superpower. China can retaliate by nuclear means. That is something that the United States is going to be very scared of. Any sane government is going to rightly be scared of potential nuclear retaliation. This nuclear retaliation is not necessarily going to mean mutually assured destruction either, because given that we are talking about a blockade of Chinese merchant ships, China could, for example, fire a nuclear-tipped torpedo at a US carrier group, thereby sinking that carrier group and possibly even several carrier groups at once. This would not cause mutually assured destruction, but it would create a crisis on an international scale that was never seen before in the history of the planet. The second reason I do not think that this is going to happen is because China also has its own nuclear submarine force. The Chinese Blue Water Navy is far weaker than the United States Blue Water Navy, but it is still enough to blockade US shipping to some extent. The third reason is that China has the Belt and Road Initiative working to its advantage. The Belt and Road Initiative was built with this in mind. China has land-based trade routes with Russia from which it can buy all of the oil and all of the natural gas that it is ever going to need. Likewise, China can trade with Iran through land-based trade routes. Trade with Pakistan and to a lesser extent with India, but also with other East Asian countries, is also going to be unhindered because there are land-based routes to them, and in the case of East Asia, China can also conduct naval trade because in this region it has naval dominance. China can trade with Central Asia. China can trade with Europe. China can even trade, to some extent, with Africa through land-based trade routes, although admittedly, with Africa, this is going to be much, much harder. The United States does not have nearly as many land-based trade routes, nor can it threaten Chinese land-based trade routes to anywhere near the same extent. The third reason why I do not think that it is ever going to happen is because lots of other countries would be very annoyed with the United States should such a thing ever happen. Russia especially is a de facto military ally of China, especially where American matters are concerned. Russia is also a great power adversary of the United States. Russia has its own very capable blue water navy, especially where nuclear submarines are concerned. Russia has its own strategic bomber force, which can reach anywhere on the planet. The combined military forces of Russia and China are going to make it far, far too risky for the United States to ever attempt to do such a thing. While I am almost certain that the United States would try to conduct some sort of military provocation against China in the event that China should attempt to reclaim Taiwan by military force, I do not think that such attempts would be very far-reaching. If anything, the most I can imagine is the United States supporting some anti-Chinese military proxies. Nonetheless, this is still somewhat risky for China. In 10 to 20 years, when China is going to be the undisputed #1 largest economic power on the planet, when China is going to have rough blue water naval parity with the United States, it is going to be much, much safer for China to attempt to reunite with Taiwan by military means. But even then, there are going to be the aforementioned drawbacks to a reunification by military force versus a reunification by peaceful means. Therefore, I believe that China is going to try to do everything in its power to allow for reunification by peaceful means. What is often overlooked, however, is that China has many ways in which it can militarily pressure Taiwan without resorting to an outright amphibious assault. First of all, I would like to briefly talk about the possibility of a naval blockade. A lot of people on the internet have recently commented on the possibility of a Chinese naval blockade of Taiwan, in which PLA destroyers, frigates, and corvettes are simply going to surround Taiwan, and they're not going to allow any cargo ships to move in or out of Taiwan until Taiwan surrenders and accepts being a part of the People's Republic of China. This strategy has many advantages over an amphibious assault. A blockade does not result in military or civilian casualties. A blockade does not result in infrastructural damage. And the PLA has every capability to maintain this blockade for a very long amount of time. This is why I believe that if there will be an operation to retake Taiwan, it is not going to be via amphibious landing, but rather via a long drawn-out blockade. However, there are a few issues with this approach as well. First of all, you still have the problem of disrupting global shipping, especially if you consider that a lot of the global economy is actually quite dependent on Taiwan, and even China's internal economy is somewhat dependent on trade with Taiwan. Such a blockade could potentially last many months or even years, and even then, there is no absolute guarantee that Taiwan would surrender. I think that it is likely that Taiwan would cave in after a long time, but there is no 100% guarantee. Therefore, I do not think that mainland China is going to try to reunite with Taiwan by military force anytime soon. What mainland China can do instead of all of this, and something that is going to be far, far more effective, is to use its total escalatory dominance over this region. Mainland China has total escalatory dominance over Taiwan. This means that should there be some sort of diplomatic row between Taiwan and mainland China, the mainland can escalate that conflict militarily to a point that Taiwan can no longer handle. That is why Taiwan is always going to eventually cave in to mainland Chinese political demands. To demonstrate an example of how this works, I would like to remind everybody that last year, a corporation of the United States military-industrial complex called Lockheed Martin made a large arms deal with Taiwan in which they sold Taiwan F-16 fighter jets. This annoyed the mainland Chinese authorities greatly. Mainland China actually placed sanctions on Lockheed Martin over that debacle. And there was talk by mainland Chinese politicians that they would intercept future weapons shipments. So imagine the following scenario. Imagine that there is another large arms deal between Taiwan and the United States. Taiwan pays the United States X many millions or billions of dollars for some new equipment, and then the United States begins to ship that equipment to Taiwan, but the People's Liberation Army intercepts that shipment. The People's Liberation Army would simply seize any ship moving military technology, and they would claim that military technology for themselves. What is Taiwan going to be able to do to retaliate in such a situation? The answer is that Taiwan is going to be able to do very, very little. Should Taiwan, for example, try to militarily reclaim that shipment, the PLA is just not going to let them. Should Taiwan try to escalate asymmetrically, China can escalate much further. And China can keep on escalating to a point that Taiwan is no longer able to handle. Another thing I would like to talk about is TSMC, or the Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. TSMC is one of the world's biggest supplier of semiconductors. They have some of the most advanced semiconductors on the planet. There is actually a global semiconductor shortage right now. Because of this semiconductor shortage, a lot of electronics companies are suffering. But this semiconductor shortage is more severe in China than in many other places. This is because the United States placed sanctions on many Chinese electronic companies. And as a result, many international semiconductor manufacturers are unwilling to sell their products to Chinese companies. Many mainland Chinese electronic companies, such as Huawei, actually took a fairly big hit because of this. China needs semiconductors. China has been trying to develop its own semiconductor industry over the last several years, but while there have been some successes, those successes have been less than what was desired. China is very dependent on foreign semiconductor shipments. The United States knows this, and they are trying to choke off the supply of semiconductors to China. A couple of weeks ago, TSMC announced that they are going to be blacklisting a mainland Chinese company due to American sanctions. TSMC has factories in Taiwan, in mainland China, and it is also looking to open some in the United States. I think that it is very likely that this move is simply a symbolic move that is meant to placate the United States. I think that it is very likely that these mainland Chinese electronic companies are still going to receive semiconductors from TSMC, but that they are going to receive it through some intermediary. The United States will have no way to prove that TSMC is still having deals with mainland Chinese companies that are under sanctions. Therefore, TSMC will not be targeted by American sanctions. However, if this is not the case, then I think that it is an extremely foolish move on TSMC's behalf. The mainland Chinese government can inflict a lot more pain on TSMC than a country that is located on the other side of the planet. One of the ways in which China can retaliate against TSMC is by disrupting TSMC's business in China. But a far more severe manner in which mainland China can bring pain onto TSMC is by using its military, by disrupting TSMC's work in Taiwan. Here is where we again need to talk about the fact that Taiwan is internationally recognized as a part of China. Even Taiwan recognizes itself to be a part of China. Therefore, the People's Republic of China can do the following. They can say that since TSMC is a Taiwanese company and Taiwan is part of the People's Republic of China, TSMC is a mainland Chinese company. And the People's Republic of China is therefore going to treat TSMC as their own company, and they are going to be able to control it as if it was one of their own companies. So they have the legal means to do this. Due to their military, they also have the physical means. Let us imagine a hypothetical scenario in which TSMC starts to blacklist many mainland Chinese companies. TSMC, in this case, would be a de facto foreign competitor to mainland China. It would be a force that mainland China is going to have every interest in bringing down a notch. In this case, mainland China is simply going to be able to either blockade all of Taiwan or selectively intercept cargo ships that it believes to be carrying products related to TSMC, thereby forcing TSMC to change its policies. In general, should Taiwan continue to be a thorn in mainland China's side, what mainland China can do is simply temporarily blockade Taiwan, not to force Taiwan to reunite with mainland China, but to force Taiwan to change its policies on the international arena. Taiwan would not be able to do anything about this. If mainland China starts seizing Taiwanese cargo ships left, right, and center, Taiwan is not able to do anything about that. The United States and every other world power is going to be equally helpless in such a scenario. China can use its military to force Taiwan to change its foreign policy. Taiwan being militarily outmatched this badly means that while Taiwan can still afford to act as a de facto sovereign state, at least for the time being, mainland China is going to be able to exert an extreme amount of pressure on Taiwan to change its foreign policy. In fact, I believe that this is what mainland China is already doing to Taiwan. In January of 2021, a US diplomat was supposed to make an official visit to Taiwan. In response, the PRC threatened to close off Taiwanese airspace. The PRC said that if this ambassador makes an official visit to Taiwan, the PRC would simply close Taiwanese airspace, Taiwan would not be able to do anything about it, the United States would not be able to do anything about it, and the whole debacle would end at that. As a result, this diplomat had to cancel her official state visit to Taiwan, and the United States had to back down. Another thing that I am sure many people have noticed is that the PLA has been conducting many flights near Taiwan recently. Almost every single week over the last few months, there has been some new report that talks about 15 to 20 PLA combat aircraft, among which are usually advanced fighter jets like the J-11 and J-16, as well as strategic bombers and AWACS aircraft encroaching very near to Taiwan's airspace, purposefully entering Taiwan's air defense identification zone. I think that this is also not a signal that there is going to be a military assault on Taiwan soon, but rather that mainland China is going to use its military superiority, and if needed, it is going to remind Taiwan what its place is, so to speak. Chinese military capabilities are growing practically by the month. Just yesterday, 3 large new warships were commissioned into the People's Liberation Army Navy. One of these was a Type 055 cruiser. The PLA officially considers it to be a destroyer. However, by NATO classification, and even by Russian classifications, it is a cruiser. It is almost 1.5 times the size of any other destroyer. This destroyer has stealth capabilities as well, by the way. It is arguably the most advanced surface destroyer on the planet. Another warship was the 40,000-ton 075 LHD, which brings China's amphibious capabilities to a whole new level. And lastly, there was the Type 094 nuclear ballistic missile submarine. All of this in just a single day. And as the PLA's capabilities are growing, so is mainland China's capability to militarily influence Taiwan. The PLA is only going to undertake extreme military measures such as a full-on blockade or an amphibious assault only if Taiwan is going to do something extremely stupid. For example, declaring independence or inviting the American military onto the island. Barring those scenarios, I think that there will be peaceful reunification between Taiwan and mainland China sometime within the next 20 to 30 years. By that point, China will almost certainly be the undisputed global superpower, and no other entity is going to be able to interfere with the process of reunification. But until then, in order to prevent Taiwan from acting against the PRC's interest, this navy is going to continue expanding, and it is going to encircle Taiwan like a noose. It is not going to completely choke off Taiwan from the rest of the world. It is not going to force Taiwan to reunite with the People's Republic of China. Rather, it is going to be an instrument of force, which, if it is needed, is going to be used to force Taiwan to undertake policies that are more favorable to the People's Republic of China.